Now, before you get all angry in the comments, let me just state my opinion, and I know that 90% of people will disagree with this. Steel Vengeance looks amazing, however, ArieForce One looks just to maybe have the edge. Now, it's safe to say that Steel Vengeance is an absolutely amazing ride, but many people have not been paying attention to the latest video that FunSpot posted of ArieForce One testing. It's flying, and it's not even loaded, and it's not even that hot out. Just imagine when it's all warmed up on a hot summer day with a fully loaded train. Like, I just don't think people are paying attention to this. For those of you who don't know, ArieForce One is a large RMC steel coaster coming to a tiny family park about 15 minutes south of Atlanta, Georgia. Steel Vengeance is an even larger RMC hybrid located at Cedar Point and is considered by many as the best coaster on Earth. A couple of coasters in Europe and Florida have seemed to surpass it recently, but there are still many people that think Steel Vengeance is the best coaster in the world. And though I've not ridden Steel Vengeance, I have ridden those two coasters in Florida, and I can confidently say that there is no way Steel Vengeance is better than those. And again, in my opinion, we'll talk about why that matters so much in a little. Now, why do I think that ArieForce One will be better than Steve? Well, both coasters are airtime focused rides, right? And both coasters do really well at that. Steel Vengeance does better because it has the most airtime of any coaster in the world, but ArieForce One still does have great airtime. Well, for me, when we get onto coasters that could be my number one, it needs to have a variety of forces. Like, the ingredients for the perfect coaster for me are airtime, pacing, whip, hang time, or at least good inversions. Well, my current number one, Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens Tampa, seems to have all of those. It has a bunch of airtime scattered all around, it tears through its layout, and it does have a great deal of whip, especially with that overbank turn. And while the stall isn't the best, meaning that there really isn't that much hang time, the death roll is a great inversion. For most people, they would just say airtime, length, and maybe pacing is what makes the best coaster, but I'm told I have weird opinions when it comes to coasters, and I understand why. I'm not saying that I'd hate Steel Vengeance. It would probably still be in my top 5 because I love airtime, but a coaster that can check off all the boxes would be the coaster that I'd put on top. Now, there are exceptions. Velocicoaster Islands of Adventure, which is my number 2, doesn't necessarily have the best pacing, or at least in the first half, nor does it have the most airtime, but the fact that it just never bores me and it's just a crazy experience makes up for it. There is no wasted space on Velocicoaster at all. There's always something happening. And another coaster that would also probably get an exception is Ride to Happiness at Plopsaland Japan in Belgium. That ride just looks to be an unreal experience, that's why. But for the most part, a ride that exceeds in most of the categories, or all of them, like Iron Gwazi, would be the ride that I'd pick as my number 1. ArieForce One also just seems to excel in all of these categories. Now, I haven't ridden it yet, obviously, but by looking at it running, you can easily tell that it'll give whip on those barrel rolls and that second outer bank turn. You can easily see that those airtime pops will launch you into space. I mean, it's themed to taking you into space, so I'd hope it would, right? You can easily tell that that 0G stall will leave you hanging for several seconds. ArieForce One just checks off all the categories that Steel Vengeance doesn't. Steel Vengeance has airtime, obviously, but the pacing and whip are kind of okay. I mean, there's whip on that outer bank stall thingy, whatever it's called, but there's not really that much whip other than that, and there's basically no hang time. Steel Vengeance is just too repetitive, and it's almost just too long for its own good. It's like Fury 325 at Carowinds, which is my number 3. It's got airtime with that first drop in Final Bunny Hills. It's got whip and pacing, but that helix, it does nothing but make the ride longer. If they took out that helix, it would probably become my number 1 because there wouldn't be a moment wasted. Yes, it would be a shorter ride, but if it's amazing, then I don't care how short it is. I just feel like being a long ride is almost bad. Like, some rides, like Velocicoaster, can cram in a bunch of elements and make the extra length worth it, but more often than not, the extra length will come with a price, and that's a slower part of the ride, or that it's more repetitive and it kind of ruins it. Steel Vengeance has a mid-course brake run. ArieForce One doesn't. That's a moment on Steve that is just wasted space, and I know that a mid-course is necessary because block zones, but guess what? That wouldn't be there if the ride wasn't just so long. I'd be fine if they just took out the mid-course brake run and then added something in its place that is more of, a flow or adds more onto the ride. Then they just remove the third lap to make the ride shorter, because the third lap is basically just a bunch of small little bunny hills anyway. But guess what? You already have a bunch of bunny hills in the first half of the ride, so why do you need more in the second half? Just to add more onto the ride than you don't need. See? Iron Gwazi, for example, it's more quality. Steel Vengeance is just more quantity. That's my problem. It's just, they just have too much airtime where it's not even worth it, and it's just adding on to the ride, and it's just making it more of a dull experience. Steel Vengeance also just has multiple points where it's just a bunch of airtime hills over and over again, especially in the second half, and that's great. It's better than a pointless helix, but I feel like one of those sections would be okay, but when you have multiple of those and it's just airtime all over and over again, it just starts to get old and you're ready to move on to something else like hang time or whip or something. ArieForce One does have one of those sections for the finale, but instead of being a bunch of hills on level ground, it's a quad down plus a hill in the beginning, so basically it's a quin down. But before this section of just straight up airtime, there's a bunch of laterals and whip and positive G's all before it, so it doesn't really feel like it's just going over and over again, because the last moment of just pure airtime that you've gotten was way before, about a third of the ride before on that double up. It just fits, you know, it flows. Steel Vengeance is just over and over again. Another difference with ArieForce One's quad down or quin down or whatever you want to call it is that you are gaining speed because every hill is lower than the one before it. You know, Steel Vengeance, they're all flat. You're not really gaining any speed, and there really isn't even a quin down or quad down or whatever you want to call it. Steel Vengeance, it has those 6 hills at the very end, just like ArieForce One basically, but they're all flat, and it's just ArieForce One just has a more interesting finale. ArieForce One also just has a more variety of elements while still keeping the elements as Steve. Well, I guess I've kind of said that like several times now. It's just more of a variety. There's still the outer banked airtime hill just like Steve, but there's also a 0G stall. There's a bunch of airtime hills just like Steve, but there's also some lateral airtime with that Raven Trust dive and that fakey airtime. Another very unpopular opinion is that I prefer the smaller first drops on RMCs. Twisted Cyclone, which is my number 4, has a better first drop than Iron Gwazi in my opinion. I have nothing against Iron Gwazi's drop. It's still amazing, but that power that you get on Twisted Cyclone is crazy. 75 degrees on an approximately 85-foot drop is just an unexplainable feeling in the back row, at least. The front is, well, actually the front row isn't very good, but the back row is crazy. So if I follow this logic, this means that ArieForce One will have a better first drop than Steel Vengeance. Now, if this will be the case, I really can't tell you. I feel like Arie's drop could either be the perfect mix of powerful and sustained airtime, or it could be the complete opposite. It'll be a great drop, but I really can't tell you how much better or worse than Steel Vengeance it'll be. I'm leaning towards about the same, but who knows. As you can see, ArieForce One looks to have the pacing, whip, and hang time that Steel Vengeance doesn't have, while still maintaining they have the large amounts of airtime that Steel Vengeance does have. And again, I'm not saying that Steve is or will be a bad ride when I ride it, because I haven't ridden it, but just by looking at the layouts, ArieForce One seems to check off all the boxes that make a good ride for me. Do you agree with what I'm saying? Do you disagree with what I'm saying? If so, feel free to write a comment below. And with all that said, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to be in the know for all the future ArieForce One content, because spoiler alert, there's going to be a lot of it. And please make sure to have a thrilling rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.